So that is the specific aspect of SMART goals. That when we write SMART goals, we ask who, what, where, and why. The next part of SMART goals, the next characteristic of SMART goals that we'll talk about is measurable. Simply put, when we say that we want our SMART goals to be measurable, we mean that we put a number on them. Here I call it a quantitative criteria, but I just mean put a number on it. That there is some way to objectively measure your progress towards a goal, that there is some way to objectively know when you have accomplished the goal. Some outcomes are really easy to measure. So in sports, there are very clear rules about how performance is rewarded with points, and it's very easy to see who has the most points. We might argue about who's actually the best team, but as far as who scores the most points, who wins the most games, that is very clear and easy to measure. In business, we have things like this sometimes. Sales would be an example of something that's really easy to measure. Number of hours worked is something that's easy to measure. Budgets are easy to measure. There are some things in business that naturally lend themselves to quantification. On the other hand, there are things that are very difficult to quantify. One aspect of performance that's hard to quantify is attitude. Like if someone has a bad attitude, it's really hard to say, hey, your attitude was a 2 this quarter and I want it to be a 4 next quarter. That's really subjective. It's really difficult to measure things like attitude, and there are other aspects of performance that are difficult to measure as well. So because of this, we use something called a proxy variable. Sometimes we want to measure one thing, but it's very difficult to measure, so we measure something else instead that is easy to measure, and that variable we measure is called the proxy variable. The proxy variable isn't what we're really interested in. We're really interested in something else, but that thing that we're interested in is reflected in the proxy variable. So an example of this is I see a lot of people using the number of calories in food as a proxy measure for how healthy it is. So people will say, oh, it's only 100 calories, it's healthy. That's not obviously how healthy food works, but people are using it as a proxy. They're interested in how healthy the food is. That's a difficult thing to assess. It's really easy to look on the back and see how many calories are in it, so they use that as a proxy variable. Now, you can mistake, it's very easy to mistake the proxy variable for the thing that you're actually interested in. Even though they are distinct, it's easy to confuse them. This is something that we call reification. Reification is when you mistake what you're measuring with what you're actually interested in. So let me give you an example of this. When police wear body cameras, complaints of abuse drop significantly. Why? Well, if you are a civil rights activist, you would say that now that the police know that they're being recorded, they've stopped violating people's civil rights. They know that there's a video record of this, and so they quit the bad behavior. So when we record police officers, the civil liberties abuse drops, and that's why we get fewer complaints. Police advocates, on the other hand, will make the exact opposite argument. They'll say that no. It's not that we're abusing people less. It's that now that there is a video recording, people make fewer false complaints. So because they know there's a video record, they won't make a complaint because there's evidence that they're making the complaint up. You probably have an opinion about which of these interpretations is correct. You probably have a strong opinion on it. However, just from the information we have, we can't determine which of those interpretations is correct because we did not measure abuse. We're interested in abuse, but we didn't measure abuse. We measured complaints of abuse. And complaints of abuse is a proxy measure. It's a very useful proxy measure, but it is not abuse itself. What's interesting here is that both police advocates and civil rights advocates can agree that we want complaints of abuse to drop. Now, it's really important that you are very thoughtful about what you choose to measure, because what gets measured gets done. I used to see people with Fitbit, and they'd be like looking at their Fitbit and like pacing around a room, trying to get their steps up, and I always thought that was so stupid. until someone gave me a Fitbit. And then I started doing that, right? Because I got to get 10,000 steps for the day. Why? I don't know. So I can see a cool little graphic on my watch. Regardless, my point being that humans just have this weird quirk. When you put a number on something, that is the thing they will chase after. And oftentimes it's easier to measure quantifiable things. So it's easier to measure how many sales calls you made than to measure the quality of something. And so we often default to measuring quantity when in actuality we're interested in improving quality. But because it's difficult to measure quality, we measure quantity instead. But then people start focusing on quantity instead of quality. So you have to be very careful about what you choose to actually measure. This is our goal. We will create a database of profit, not-for-profit, and government organizations in Marin that includes email, physical address, and phone number to target for marketing survey response. How do we measure this? Pretty easily. We can just throw a 10 in front of profit, not-for-profit, and government organizations. And now it's quantifiable. Now we have numbers on it. Putting numbers into your SMART goals will invariably be one of the most difficult things that you do when you're making SMART goals. It's the thing that people struggle with the most. But do your best. Put a number on it. It's very important.